is a professor. I just heard something, Angelica, a voice
It is
saying that this meeting is recorded. Okay. Yes. Should I press continue? Should I press continue? I have a meeting.
Yes, of course. Continue.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, everyone. I'll start again. Okay. Welcome to this keynote speech. We have with us Carla Willig, who is a professor at the City University of London and is our keynote speaker. And she's going to have a keynote talk with the title Bridges and Boundaries, Diversity with a Purpose. Instead of simply reading to you Carla's CV, I thought of trying in this very brief introduction to give you an idea of how the context of Carla's talk connects with her contribution in the field of qualitative research in psychology throughout her course over the years. So in her talk, for some reason this is not working. Yeah, sorry. In her talk, Carla promises in the abstract to address a key question: what makes qualitative research research, by delineating criteria for differentiating qualitative research from other meaning-making activities which aim to capture human experience. And she situates, as she writes in the abstract of her keynote, this discussion within the context of a broader debate in the field concerning whether such demarcation or such criteria are desirable or not. I think that the focus of Carla's talk is not something which comes as a surprise. A couple of years ago, when Philia Isari invited Carla in Athens for a workshop, I recall Carla saying that a lot of people consider her a methodologist because throughout her work, she seems to engage in questions about the nature, the stature, and the legitimacy of knowledge claims, and also the process via which we come up with such knowledge claims. How did it all start then? Carla, when I asked her what I could include in her presentation, she said that she engaged in qualitative research at a time when qualitative research was, at the margins of psychology, late 80s, by, as she herself said, I quote her, a wonderful lecturer, Maureen Crane, Dr. Maureen Crane, when she was doing her MPhil in criminology at the Institute of Criminology at the University of Cambridge. And ever since, as she also said, this has been a lifelong learning journey because she engaged with all qualitative research, many qualitative research methodologies, like starting with grounded theory methodology during her doctoral research in the 80s, discourse analysis when she reanalyzed her PhD data in the 90s, phenomenological methods during her counseling psychology MA thesis, memory work, qualitative metasynthesis most recently, dual focus methodology, pluralistic research group, she's a member there currently. And all this reflects, of course, in her outstanding record of publications. She has published 9 books, 51 papers, and 14 book chapters. And she has been a lecturer, starting with Middle Essex University in London, University of Plymouth, and she's currently a professor at the City University of London since 1999. So from all this work, I have chosen, I don't know, I hope this is okay, to highlight 2 of her publications, and I will explain why right away. The first is her well-known book, Introducing Qualitative Research in Psychology. We are expecting the new edition within 2021. And this book has got 16 chapters now, when the first edition had only 9, and this shows the evolution of the field as well. This is actually my bridge with Carla, because I was delighted to edit its Greek translation back in 2015. And the reason I chose to highlight this publication of Carla is because I think, in my view, it shows her unique ability to communicate complex ideas with much clarity and structure. And I think being a lifelong learner makes Carla a very good teacher also, because at least, students here have welcomed this book very much, and many colleagues as well. And the second publication of Carla, which I'd like to highlight, is this recent paper she has published, What Can Qualitative Psychology Contribute to Psychological Knowledge? in a flagship journal published by the American Psychological Association. The journal is called Psychological Methods. And the reason I have chosen to highlight this work of Carla is because I think that it also illustrates Carla's ability, unique ability, I think, to communicate these complex ideas not only to people who like them or who are in favor of them, but she's capable of reaching across and creating bridges, communicating these ideas with people who may not believe or like qualitative research. I know there's a long story behind this publication. Maybe Carla later on will give us some hints. I find this important. As my PhD supervisor, Ivan Eisler, used to say, the thing is to communicate your ideas not only to those who like them, but also to those who may challenge them. And I think that Carla picks up this challenge. Personally, I cannot wait to listen to her talk. I'll just give you an idea of how we're going to run this session. Just in case, we have a plan B in case we have technical problems. We also have a video, but Carla will go live and speak to you live, unless we have problems, of course. And you can, of course, post your questions in the chat. Right after her talk, I can see there your questions, or even raise hand once she completes her talk, because I can then see you and give you, the floor to place your question. So, dear Professor Willig, dear Carla, thank you so much for being here. We're delighted to have you with us. And welcome to our first conference of the Association of European Qualitative Researchers in Psychology. The floor is yours, Carla.
Okay, thank you so much, Eleftheria, for such a wonderful introduction. I feel like this is the high point and I could just leave now and have a coffee and would feel very happy, but I won't do that, of course. I just want to start by really thanking the committee for inviting me to give a keynote talk at what feels like a really important conference for qualitative research in Europe. And it is an honor and a privilege to share my reflections on this occasion with you. Now, given that this is the inaugural conference of the Association of European Qualitative Researchers in Psychology, I thought it was a good idea to reflect on what it is that we are doing when we carry out qualitative research in psychology. I will start sharing my PowerPoint with you now, so I don't forget when I need to refer to my slides. Okay. Hang on. Okay, can you see? Yeah?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So on the association's website, it says that EQUIP, and I quote, aims to create bridges among qualitative researchers in psychology across Europe, bridges between researchers from different European countries, but also bridges between different research traditions of qualitative inquiry in psychology, and that this includes creating a dialogue with other disciplines and interdisciplinary areas. And so precisely because the aim of the association is to build bridges, make connections, and foster dialogue between different strands and approaches, I feel that it is important to be clear about the purpose of qualitative research in psychology in its broadest sense. So in other words, to know where we build the bridges from, where we are, and to have an understanding of what unites us all in our diversity. So I feel that relevant questions for us to address are the following. What is qualitative research? What are we doing when we conduct qualitative research? And what makes qualitative research research as opposed to something else? What is our purpose as qualitative researchers, and what unites us? So this talk, sorry. this talk offers some reflections on what makes qualitative research research rather than something else, and where the boundaries might lie between qualitative research and other types of activities, and also very much to initiate a discussion around these questions. And to this end, in my talk, I will identify discussion points that we can return to after my talk, and these discussion points will be on slides, but they will also be posted at the end of my talk into the chat, so we can have them there to address, to ignore, to pick up, however we feel. So the first slide of discussion points shows questions like, does all this even matter? Do we really need to demarcate qualitative research? And does qualitative psychology have to involve research? Now, qualitative research has many different phases. It can look like philosophy, for example, when we problematize the notion of truth. It can read like fiction or memoir, for example, when it presents narrative accounts of subjective experience. It can resemble critical literature reviewing when we use meta-synthesis, or it can look very much like a clinical case study formulation, for example, when we use psychosocial approaches. Furthermore, anything that captures human experience can be used as qualitative data, and there are countless ways in which such data can be analyzed, with new types of analysis emerging all the time, as we see at this conference. The kinds of insights and observations that can be generated on the basis of qualitative analysis can take numerous forms, ranging from realist claims about the occurrence of social process in the real world at one end of the epistemological spectrum, to relativist accounts of how a particular version of reality has been talked into being on the other. In the face of such diversity, it can be difficult to identify the boundaries that demarcate qualitative research as a discipline, distinct from other scholarly pursuits and social engagements. Although there are those who argue that such demarcation is not a desirable move and that there is no need for disciplinary boundaries around qualitative research, I see some value in reflecting on what makes qualitative research research, especially where such research is used to inform policy, practices, or interventions. Why? Because otherwise our recommendations and observations are not grounded in anything that critically and methodically engages with our gut feelings, pre-existing political or ideological commitments, and or personal experiences. So for me, there is value in holding on to the notion that qualitative research, despite its epistemological elasticity and methodological diversity, remains committed to the aims of all forms of research, which are to use a methodical process of investigation that seeks to arrive at new insights and understandings that constitute knowledge about something. Now, it's not easy to identify criteria for assessing whether something does or does not constitute qualitative research, because qualitative research as a genre cannot be defined and demarcated on the basis of the use of particular methods of data collection and analysis. The constant emergence of novel approaches and techniques demonstrates that conducting qualitative research is a problem-solving activity that generates new solutions in the form of new ways of accessing and interrogating data all the time. So how may we determine whether something is qualitative research? I would suggest that the first thing is the presence of a research question. I do feel that it is important to start with a specific research question, although this may of course evolve or change altogether during the research process. And I believe this is the case for ethical as well as epistemological reasons. I feel that it helps to know what it is we are seeking insight into as we engage with data in whatever form. And it also allows us to be transparent with our research participants as it is hard for them to give consent if it isn't clear what it is we want to know. Of course, the questions we ask are inevitably shaped by the socio-historical and political context within which they are formulated. This includes the role of funding bodies and companies as they shape what is considered worth asking questions about. And this is often driven by commercial motives. But just because every question has a context and a history doesn't mean that the answer is also predetermined, especially when the question is open-ended as well as open to revision, as most qualitative research questions are. So I propose that we adopt a I want to know mentality rather than I want to show mindset. Of course, the starting point of a piece of research can be the acknowledgement of an undesirable state of affairs. For example, the underrepresentation of a socio-demographic group in a workplace or a profession. But a question then needs to be asked about it to which the answer is not known. For example, how does it come about? Why does it happen? How does it happen? What does it mean to a particular group of people? So, for example, a researcher can advocate for a group of people by drawing attention to an experiential phenomenon that has been under the radar and has not received research attention. Perhaps because there is no money to be made by knowing more about it, or because the group of people involved has little or no social or political capital. However, in my view, it is important that the researcher does not have an ideologically informed agenda in relation to the study's findings, and that they remain open to whatever emerges from the research rather than setting out to prove a point with the research. And this leads us on to the second feature of qualitative research, which I think should be methodological transparency. Now, I think we need transparency regarding the methods and procedures that we use to arrive at any conclusions. I think it is really important to allow ourselves to be surprised by what we find. And this can only happen if we follow the steps required by our chosen method, regardless of where they may lead us. I'm speaking from experience here, as the grounded theory analysis of interview data, which I carried out for my PhD back in the 1980s, did not reveal what I had expected, and if I'm honest, also what I had hoped that it would show. As a Marxist and a member of the Socialist Workers' Party in the United Kingdom at the time, I was invested in the idea that it was people's social class that shaped their experiences and perceptions. My PhD research was a social psychological study of heterosexual people's perceptions of HIV/AIDS. I was interested in the relationship between people's underlying fundamental beliefs about the world and their perceptions of what HIV/AIDS meant for them and for society. In line with my pre-existing perspective and beliefs, I expected working class and middle class participants to express different views and perceptions. However, what I found was that it was gender and not social class that seemed to shape participants' perceptions most, with women expressing a sense of tension between rationality and emotion in relation to the experience of this topic, whilst men seemed to strive to present consistent and internally coherent accounts of their thoughts and feelings about HIV and AIDS. I know we've become critical of the claim that findings emerge from the data, and we acknowledge that the researcher plays a role in constructing the findings. However, I think it's important to ensure that both aspects of the hermeneutic circle, namely what we bring to the data and what the data brings to us, to be present so that genuinely new understanding can emerge from the process. Recently, I was really struck by the importance of letting the data speak when my mum told me about a book called Last Letters from Stalingrad, which reproduces letters sent by German soldiers in 1943 during the siege of Stalingrad during the Second World War. Just to lighten things up, here's my mum. My mum said that she was shocked by the fact that most of the soldiers still expressed enthusiasm for the war and for its aims. I then read the book myself, and I found an analysis of the content of the letters by the editor, which showed the following mood categories with percentages of their representations in the letters. So here we had a positive attitude to the war effort was present in 2.1%, doubting attitude in 4.4%, unbelieving, rejecting in 57%, oppositional 3.4%, without attitude, indifferent, so they would be writing about things unrelated to the war, 33%. So I think this shows really that my mum had been so struck by the fact that there was some letters in which the soldiers still expressed a positive attitude to the war, despite the situation they were in. And this led her to remember these letters most vividly. And this in turn led her to the impression that most of the soldiers still supported the war effort. However, the data in the form of the letters shows something different. Using a specific method or combination of methods and analysis allows us to distill something from the data, information, insight, understanding, which may surprise us, challenge us, perhaps even threaten us by unsettling our deeply held assumptions about something. I think this is why we need methodology in qualitative research. However, again, I'm aware that there are different views about this, and the following questions can be raised to reflect further on this. For example, is there a difference between journalism and qualitative research, between forms of artistic expression and qualitative research, between philosophy and qualitative research? Now, the third criterion, I think, is contribution to knowledge. So here, of course, the concept of knowledge can be problematized. And in my argument, it is acknowledged that while reality exists, it is stratified. And within each strata, knowledge can be gained. So even though there is not one truth about something, this does not equate to saying that there are as many truths as there are observers of something. It means that we can know different things about one and the same object. For example, it makes no sense to ask, what is the truth about cars? What we can ask and obtain more or less accurate answers to are questions such as, what are cars made of? When were they first made? Who invented them? What are the attitudes of environmentalists towards cars? How do car owners feel about their cars? And so on. So we can ask questions in relation to each strata of reality, physical, biochemical, historical, psychological, and so on, and answer them as accurately or meaningfully as possible. But we can't reduce all strata to one, for example, by concluding that a car is basically a lump of metal. This would indeed amount to reductionism. I was really struck by the coexistence of strata of reality when on one of my daily lockdown walks, I assume everyone knows what lockdown walk might be during COVID-19. I went out every day for an hour on a walk, and this was during one of my daily lockdown walks in Abney Park Cemetery in London, where I contemplated a statue of an angel on a family grave. And whilst I was doing this, I experienced a deep sense of gratitude for the statue's unchanging nature, the fact that it had stood there for over 100 years without feeling the need to move or to change. And this made me feel happy and safe. And I realized that my experiential reality of the statue was a sense of stillness and stability. At the same time, I was aware that whilst I was peacefully contemplating the stone angel, historical realities were being contested around the statue of Edward Colston, a 17th century slave trader in Bristol in the UK. Here it was a statue's relationship with historical events, in this case slavery, and the social meanings and messages contained in its presence on a plinth in the center of an English city, that was at stake. So statues can exist in different strata of reality, and this means that there is not just one truth about a statue. However, I would argue that within a particular stratum, our answers to such questions can be more or less accurate, appropriate, or meaningful. For example, we can conduct historical research to establish when a statue was made, by whom, for whom, who paid for it, how newspapers of the day commented on it, and so on. We can conduct survey research to find out how many people disapprove of a statue's presence in a public space and what reasons they give for their views. We can conduct research into people's experiences of encountering a statue in different contexts, how it makes them feel to walk past it every day. And we can conduct research in the use of discourse in constructing meaning around discussions of the desirability or otherwise of removing statues, for example, by constructing them as a manifestation of culture wars. My point is that an acknowledgement that there are multiple truths about a phenomenon can coexist with a commitment to finding answers to research questions which can be more or less valid. Different methods provide access to different strata of reality. There are aspects of reality that humans cannot perceive directly. And unaided human perception only allows access to experiential strata. For example, we see the sun rise, and seeing the sun rise is an experiential reality for those who have vision. It is an experiential reality which can also be captured in more or less poetic language. From an astronomical point of view, however, the sun stays exactly where it is, whilst the Earth turns on its axis and travels around the sun. So the astronomical reality that the Earth and with it the people who live on it travel around the sun, and this reality can coexist with my experiential reality of seeing the sun rise. Both statements can be true at the same time because they make claims about different strata of reality. And of course, within each stratum of reality, there can be different layers of meaning that tap into different aspects and different dimensions of a phenomenon. For example, the experiential reality of seeing the sun rise can be examined in terms of the thoughts and feelings it generates in a person, in terms of the language a person uses to talk about this experience, or in terms of the effect it has on their mood, amongst other possibilities. Pluralist research designs are well placed to address such questions in one and the same study. So my argument has been that for something to be qualitative research, it needs to be underpinned by a research question, it needs to spell out a methodological procedure, and it needs to be committed to contribute to knowledge in some form. I realize that there's currently some debate around these propositions, and I believe that it is worthwhile to engage in reflection and discussion around questions such as, do we actually want to generate knowledge, build theories, or do we want to make people think about something or make them think differently about something? Do we want to draw attention to the fact that there are different ways of thinking about something? Or do we want to critique the knowledge that is out there to open a space without filling it with something new? These are just some of the questions that I'm hoping we can discuss, and I will stop there and hopefully open up to a lively debate. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Carla, for this thought-provoking talk. Thank you. We already have questions in the chat. So do you want Angelica to post the simulating questions that you have prepared, or should we just jump into discussion?
We could jump in.
Jump in.
If you, yeah, I mean, you could post them. It can't do any harm, Angelica, if you don't mind, then they're there.
Yes,
but obviously we should focus on questions raised by people who are actually here rather than me imagining what people might be asking. So yeah, let's go on.
So I'll give you the first question that I see in the chat, right? What about conversation analysis that starts with an unmotivated stance? Needs a research question. Does it need a research question? Sorry, but I cannot see your name because there is like a pseudonym on the post to say your name. So Carla, did you listen to the question?
Yes, I did. Yes, I mean, I think in response to this, there are a couple of things I would say. I think for some methods, the research question is always very similar. So the method actually informs the question. So in this case, for conversation analysis, it would be questions such as, how do people negotiate X, Y, Z? How do people end a telephone conversation? How do people, so it's always going to be about how people use language, you know, to negotiate or achieve something. So I think it's a good point that for some methods, the research question will be quite similar, but obviously for each study we need to fill in, you know, what it is specifically pointing to. So yes. The other thing, if I could add to that, because the reason I looked to the side here when Eleftheria read out the question is because I've actually got, I have another laptop here with some notes, and I've got some really interesting quotes about conversation analysis and discursive psychology from a recent special issue in Qualitative Methods in Psychology, which is really placing conversation analysis within quite a scientific type framework, which I was really struck by. So if I may just read this out, this comes from the guest editor's introductory paper, Huma et al. And they're saying that a conversation analysis inspired discursive psychology aims now to produce, and I quote, a robust and cumulative body of knowledge, end of quote, that is grounded in an, quote, inductive empirical approach. And it reflects, I quote, a scientific approach for studying psychological phenomena. So I'm really interested in this movement within qualitative research of people kind of, if you like, you know, embracing or feeling maybe more free than we did a while ago, to embrace a kind of a claim that what we're doing is a form of, you know, scientific research, scholarly research that seeks to produce a body of knowledge. So I'm glad you asked that, because it enabled me to mention that right at the beginning.
Okay, yes, thank you for posting your name. That was a question by Sarah Seymour Smith. Carla, thank you for posting your name. And in relation to that, there is a comment by Nikos Bossagis saying why this utterance here. Maybe this is a research question. I think he means for CA. Why this utterance here?
Sorry, I'm not quite...
I think this is in continuation to this question. And I think that in response to what kind of research question one can have for CA, Nikos is saying here, why this utterance here? This could probably be...
Yes, indeed. Yes, absolutely. And in fact, you're right. So this is really interesting in that you can have a research question which is also kind of informed by something that has already been noticed. So it's almost got a sort of hypothetical, theoretical angle to it, which we also see, of course, in grounded theory, where you can start with a very, very broad research question to begin with. And then as you move through the project, more specific, targeted questions emerge, which then allow us to really hone in on something. That's a really interesting process. And I think what you've just said there sort of demonstrates that the same can happen in CA as well, and I'm sure with other methods too. Yeah.
Shall we move on to the next question? I can see here. This is a question by Ian Williamson. He asks, if possible, could you say a little more about epistemological elasticity, please? How elastic, in quotation marks, should our epistemologies be?
That's another really good question. I think it sort of makes me think back to yesterday when I attended the book launch for Noleg Frost's new edition of her book on pluralistic qualitative research, and the idea that, you know, in a pluralistic research design, which includes perhaps a a collection of questions that are tapping into a phenomenon from different angles, that enables us to have quite a lot of epistemological elasticity built in. However, and again, this is where I think the real debates, emerge, and I think I've argued this before in several places, is that I sort of believe that at the end of the day, the sort of bottom line will be that whatever approach we use, we are, as researchers, committed to making claims about something. So even if the claims I'm going to make are about how people construct their experience or how they use language to do something, so I've got a constructionist angle there, I'm still claiming to say something about how that happens. So at the bottom, there is a kind of a realist ambition that I'm, as a researcher, claiming that I can conclude something about what's going on, even if that what's going on is a social constructionist process in some way. So, but again, I think that's where people will disagree, I think. But that's where I'm coming from with this. And that's why I'm saying, if we're doing research, that's in the end what we are doing, even if we're not always acknowledging it. And then if we abandon that claim to claim something about what's going on, maybe then we're doing something else, very valuable too, but it's not research. I think that's my argument.
Okay. The next post I see in the chat is rather, I think, a comment by Nigel King, but I will read it as well, Carla, in case you want to comment on this. Nigel King is writing, very pleased to hear a defense of the notion of emergence, again in quotation marks, in analysis. Clearly a naive view that, for example, themes are pre-existing entities should be rejected. But in my humble opinion, there is a meaningful difference between insights that emerge through the research process and a priori assumptions. And Melanie Reimer adds to this comment, themes do not emerge through analysis, but insights certainly emerge. So I don't know if you have a comment in terms of that.
Yeah, no, just to agree, really. Yeah, important observations there, yes.
All right. And a comment by Angelo Benozzo, it seems that the same 3 points are important also for quantitative research.
Indeed. And I think that's where I feel, in its broadest sense, if we're saying we're doing research as opposed to something else, then there are some fundamental aspirations maybe, or our fundamental project will be sharing some really basic features with all types, all other forms of research, including quantitative. So yes, I would agree with that. And I think maybe because, and I mean, obviously I'm talking from experience also, in that I've spent quite a long time now looking back, grappling with these issues and trying to clarify for myself. And I remember in the late 80s and early 90s, it was so important to, to clarify the difference between qualitative and quantitative thinking and how we approach data and what the role of meaning and language and all of that. So we were very much focused on doing that. But I feel now, for me, a time has come where we also have to maybe reclaim something about, the purpose of research. And the reason I'm saying that is because I'm noticing that certainly where I'm teaching with counseling psychology trainees who are doing their doctoral research, that there is a sort of a tendency to maybe adopt a position that says, there's no truth, I can't claim anything, I can only, share my reflections, and it's almost like they're abandoning any kind of claim to be contributing anything to knowledge, because they are so aware of the critique of a naive, positivist approach to knowledge. And I'm a little bit worried about us kind of going in that direction to a point where students feel that they're not really legitimately able to claim anything at the end of 3 years of research, then seems to beg the question, why do the research if you can't conclude anything about what might be going on in people's minds, in people's hearts, in the world, in, you know, whatever it is.
All right. Next question by Harris Stanek. Where do you think qualitative research fits into the open source movement that have taken over quantitative psychology research? Do you think this type of research should be pre-registered?
It's an ethical question, isn't it, really? It's a difficult ethical question, I think. You know, I mean, how would our participants feel if we did that? So, I mean, in some way, I think it would be great, but in another way, I think we do have much more ethical challenge there. But I don't know. I'm open to suggestions on that one.
And there is a related question to this one by Yorgos Vlioras, who writes, would qualitative data be made openly available in agreement with this movement in quantitative psychology?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an ethical question, really, first and foremost. Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't agree that there should be a condition for publication that something is, you know, that you log your data somewhere, because some data is just too sensitive. And also we have autoethnography, we've got all types of forms of data that really can't be made publicly available. So I think it shouldn't be, you know, a must. If anything, it might just be something we could think about ourselves, how we want to do that.
Right. Okay, another question by Nigel King. Are there any areas of qualitative psychology where there is a particularly strong tendency towards I want to show quotation marks rather than I want to know, in your view?
Yes, it's a really good question, Nigel. And maybe, you know, as whenever we speak, we orient to something. So my talk is not in a vacuum. So I'm obviously responding to something that I feel is out there, perhaps some kind of ideas that are floating about. And maybe what I am saying is that, yes, there perhaps are some areas where we need to be more careful with this. And I think it's partly because we've become, which is a good thing, we've become much more aware of social justice agendas and the need for researchers to, you know, not stand back, but in some way participate, and that our research needs to have some purpose and hopefully, you know, a positive one, which is all good. But I think that creates also a risk that we kind of start off with a view that we already know what's happening, because, you know, we have a view on something, we know there's injustice in particular areas, or we know which group of people we want to empower or help. And then with a lot of enthusiasm, we're using research to kind of show that, to prove it, to, you know, have ammunition for that. And politically, that might be a really good thing to do. And in a campaigning organization, that's what we need to do. That's what it's all about. But I'm a little bit concerned, perhaps, that again, if we don't think about this really, you know, consciously and really have a view on this, we can slip into I want to show mentality, and then our research becomes really it's not research anymore. We need to be doing research in a way that can really shock and surprise you and make you reevaluate what you thought you already knew. That's what I think about that. Yeah.
Great. Ian Williams writes, thanks for the answer to his question. And I can see Ernst Straube, who has raised his hand. Thank you for your patience, Ernst. We're listening to your question.
Okay, thank you. I do it orally. Maybe it's more fun if we talk, and maybe the others also want to join in with the video. So thank you, Carla, for your wonderful talk. So, and I agree with what you're saying, and I just have two little questions. So you are saying, one question for us, do we want to generate knowledge or not? And how I understood your talk, your answer is yes, we want to generate knowledge. So, and you say there are 3 criteria for developing knowledge. We should have a clear problem, or clear research question, transparency, and you say third, we should contribute to knowledge. And I like your ways how to do that. Okay, my question is, how can we be sure that what we develop is knowledge and not something else? Do you have more ideas about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer there would have to start with the acknowledgement that, you know, it's part of the human condition that we can never have certainty about anything. So, I mean, I'm a qualitative researcher, but I'm also an existential counseling psychologist. And that's quite an interesting combination in that, you know, in terms of my sort of view, my ontology, my view of, you know, human being, is that there is uncertainty built into the human condition, and that applies to everything, including our ability to know anything. And therefore, I would say that, you know, knowledge is always provisional, it's always evolving, it's always something that is just helping us perhaps to have a better understanding, but it's never going to be a full understanding. And also knowledge is context specific. So as I said earlier, the different strata of reality have different types of knowledge in them. So I guess maybe knowledges would be better. But at the same time, there are also things that are, you know, not anything goes within those strata. And I think that's where I would like to sort of cling on to the idea that knowledge is different from opinion or from impression or whatever. And maybe the best example is to say, you know, if there's knowledge, I can say I have knowledge about how I feel, but that's not knowledge about how something is. I mean, they're different questions. So I think, yes, knowledge is something which is always provisional, but it's definitely still something worth, you know, trying to create. Yeah. Do you have any suggestions, Ernst, that we could, how we could do that?
I'm thinking about it, and I agree with what you are saying. Knowledge is always on the way, and so on. However, you said, you know, we should differentiate meaning making. Not everything knowledge is every knowledge creation a meaning making process, or it is, but it's also every meaning making process a knowledge creation process. Is here a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think that takes me back to yesterday when I attended the, you know, you had the symposium, didn't you, yesterday, about situated generalization. I wrote lots of notes because I really found that really, really interesting. And I think, yes, and I think one idea that came up there was, I think Peter mentioned this as well in the symposium, about how concepts that we use to ask the question or to you know, formulate the knowledge claims or the observations, those concepts already obviously include theoretical propositions which are based on earlier reflections and thinking. So I think with knowledge as well, it has to be seen as a kind of historical evolving practice. And again, I think there it's really important for us to say, well, if you're a qualitative psychologist, you know, we are part of a tradition and we are part of a community. And there's a sort of historical development within that, which we are speaking to. And that's why we can have this discussion here, which might not make much sense to people in another, you know, different community or a different a group. And I think, yes, we should reach out and try to speak across these boundaries. But I also think it's very important for us to acknowledge and work with the tradition that we have as well. And meaning making and knowing about meaning making are part of that, I think. Yeah.
Great. It's much more fun, definitely. Ernst, I'll just, Carla, we have 2 more questions in the chat for you. There is one question by Mary van der Riet. I don't know if you want to say it yourself. I will read it to Carla. How does one teach quotation marks this?
Yeah, can you explain, Mary, what you mean?
Yes, hi Carla. Thanks for the really interesting input. I mean, a colleague and I, Nick Munro, have a paper tomorrow which is about the difficulties that students have with engaging with qualitative data and that meaning-making process. So, I mean, you're raising a lot of questions about knowledge production, and a lot of our evaluation of writing when we're examining a thesis, for example, might be about the strength of those knowledge claims. You know, we're using some sort of standard to evaluate them. So I'm just wondering if you have any ideas, or if you have any experiences yourself in teaching this, supervising it with postgraduate students, and how difficult it is sometimes to get students to think about epistemological things in relation to qualitative work.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I think the best way is through questions. Questions are, I think, the way forward here, so that when someone is writing something in a piece of coursework or a doctorate or whatever, to put questions. So the questions will always take it further. So how do you know this? Where does this come from? What, you know, so kind of really encourage the student to provide more evidence, either of their reflection or of you know, evidence that they use from elsewhere, so that nothing can just stand and be the final point. There always has to be a question, you know, where is it from? Why this? Why not that? You know, what's this concept? So they learn to, which is, you know, obviously not necessarily a happy place to be, where everything you say, you then question it and question it again, until you get to some point where perhaps you say, well, here I'm now arriving at an ontological claim that I'm just making, just because that's what I think, and I can't provide an evidence for that. And that might, you know, that might be a really interesting exercise as well, to see, you know, how far you can go with your questions until you get to a point. But yes, I think that might be a way to teach it, actually, through questions.
Right. Well, I can see a raised hand, and there are 2 questions already posted on the chat. I think we will not have enough time for any more questions because it's already 2:10, Carla. So maybe I will start from, you see, you know, the opposite happened. We have many questions. Yeah. So I will, because these were posted before, sorry, Maria Matiaki, I will leave your hand for the end.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Miss Telu. I can keep the room open for a little bit more if you want, this particular one.
Thank you, Angelica. But the problem is that we have a very short break in between, and then all of us need to rush to symposia and thematic sessions right after. This is why I said that. I mean, taking 2 or 3 minutes more is fine, but I don't think we have the time, you know, like we need. So, Carla, yeah? I will read you Marco Gemniani's question on the chat. Can you please elaborate on the showing versus knowing dichotomy? In my experience, lots of knowing happens through showing, for instance, performance ethnography or writing as a method of inquiry. So that the process of showing, knowing, and being inevitably interact with and co-construct each other. The process of showing and being,
Great question. And in fact, it picks up on something I was thinking of including in the talk, but then thought I'll just wait and see if it comes up, and it has come up. So this is really great. Yes, it's this whole question, isn't it, of I think for me, it's a question about perhaps also differentiating between analysis and dissemination a bit more clearly for myself in my mind as I was thinking about this, because there's obviously really interesting stuff written about art and qualitative research, using art in qualitative research. And I think what's important here is to differentiate between using sort of artistic forms of expression to disseminate something. There, of course, it's inevitable and necessary that we have an agenda of what we want to show. So it reminds me of something that I came across many, many years ago. We're talking about the early 90s in Canada. It's in Madrid, but the person presenting was from Canada. I think he was called O'Connor, but I can't be sure. It's a long time ago. I was really impressed with his work. It was very early work using the arts, and they'd done interviews with women living with breast cancer, analyzed these interviews qualitatively, and then created a play about breast cancer. So this was a really early example of the kind of work that we're now talking about more. And then they went around Canada to different places to, you know, show the play and engage women and their relatives and partners. It was a fantastic project. But it was very clear that the analysis came first, and then the play was written for a particular purpose to communicate a particular aspect of the findings, which was seen to be helpful potentially to the to the patients. It's a more difficult question how we can use artistic expression as data. And again, in recent years, we've seen a lot of work in this area as well, using methods of data collection that include more expressive artistic forms. And then we can analyze that. But in my view, I think the analytic process still has to be methodical, rigorous, and it's the same as what we might do with a text. We still have to do that work. And so in my view, analysis still comes into it, and showing something at the end of the project with a social purpose is different from using expressive data, which then can be analyzed to find something out that we may not expect to be there.
Right. Okay. I hope that Harry Stanek will excuse me, because I recall that there was a previous question in the post. So I think we can have the last question by Maria Matiaki, who is waiting with her hand raised. Carla, just one last question. Is that okay for you?
Yes.
Okay, we're listening to you, Maria.
Thank you so much for allowing me to ask the question, and thank you for this very useful presentation and insight. So my question has to do with the knowledge that we have formed based on existing knowledge. So while I was working on my PhD. My PhD comprised from 3 different studies, and I started working on an interview protocol for my 3rd study after I had finished writing the previous 2 chapters. So by the time it was time to develop an interview protocol, I found myself being very directive, even though this was an IPA study. And I had a hard time forming questions that they were more open on wanting to know. And I found myself directed more to wanting to show based on what I already knew. And that was a very big challenge for me, and I found it to be very difficult. So my question is, what can we do to overcome such obstacles and move on and be more open to what we may find?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. In IPA, we haven't really engaged with that very much. I mean, in grounded theory, of course, we do engage with that. Look, negative case analysis, looking for examples that do not fit and that might challenge the emerging theory, or to, require that it becomes modified. So I think maybe now that you're describing what happened in your analysis, maybe what we should be doing is focusing on how in IPA we can adopt some strategies a bit similar to the grounded theory strategies, but bespoke for IPA, that we could develop to help us with that. So yeah, that could be something you could do after your PhD is done. Is it done? You could write about that. That would be really helpful.
Very good advice. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Great. I think that's it with the time we have available, I'm afraid. Carla, thank you once more so much for this keynote talk. for the live discussion. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for contributing with your questions. And we have to stop here, I'm afraid. Thank you again, Carla. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone for taking part. I'm really pleased we had a proper discussion, so that was great. Thank you.
And there are many thanks for you in the chat. I hope you can see them.
Look at that now.
By numerous people in the chat. Many thanks. So, okay, thank you, everyone. That's it for today, for this session. Bye-bye.